I know I hurt you, but I swear I'll make it right.
The rope burned through Nathaniel Brennan's hands as the black stallion screamed not a whinny, but a sound of pure rage that made grown men step back. Blood dripped from his knuckles onto the dirt. 3 months. 3 months of bleeding and breaking and refusing to quit, all for a woman who'd never even looked at him. And now Sheriff Thaddeus Hartwell stood on that platform, grinning like the devil himself, reaching past his 2 beautiful daughters in their silk and satin. His hand landed on the fat girl's shoulder. "Here's your bride, Cowboy." The crowd erupted in laughter. Nate's world shattered. Chug. Before we continue with Nate's story, if you appreciate tales of real struggle, true redemption, and the kind of love that's earned through fire, hit that subscribe button.
But I swear
This is a story about what happens when the world tries to break you and you refuse to stay broken. Stay with me until the end and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Nate and Josie's journey travels across this country. Now let's go back to where it all began. The sun beat down on a Red Bluffs town square like God himself wanted to punish the earth. Nate stood at the back of the crowd, hat in hand, watching the spectacle unfold with the desperation of a drowning man reaching for driftwood. Bride Fair Day. The one day a year when the unmarried women of the territory stood on public display, and any man with property and prospects could make his claim. It was barbaric, some said. Practical, others argued. For Nate, it was his only chance. 32 years old. A small ranch 20 miles north, barely more than a cabin, a barn, and 60 acres of stubborn land that fought him for every blade of grass. No family, no connections. Just calloused hands, a strong back, and a loneliness so deep it had started eating him alive from the inside out. Sheriff Hartwell stood center stage like a king surveying his domain. Mid-50s, running to fat but still carrying himself with the arrogance of a man who'd never been told no. His silver badge caught the sunlight, flashing like a warning. Behind him stood his daughters. The crowd murmured appreciation, and Nate understood why. The 2 eldest were stunning. Annabelle, the oldest at 26, wore emerald green silk that probably cost more than Nate's horse. Dark hair cascaded down her back in perfect ringlets, skin like porcelain, lips painted red. She fanned herself, lazily bored by the proceedings, her gaze drifting over the assembled men like they were cattle at auction. Beside her stood Magnolia, 24, in sapphire blue. Blonde, where her sister was dark. Equally beautiful, equally untouchable. The 3rd daughter stood slightly behind, almost hidden by her sister's skirts. Nate barely noticed her. His eyes were locked on Annabelle. For 3 years, since the day he'd first ridden into Red Bluff, he'd seen her around town, always perfect, always out of reach. She represented everything he'd never had: beauty, refinement, acceptance. If a woman like that would have him, it would mean he'd finally made something of himself. Finally become someone who mattered. "Gentlemen," Sheriff Hartwell's voice boomed across the square, "you all know the law. Any man with land and means has the right to make an offer. But my daughters," he gestured with obvious pride, "deserve only the finest." Men pushed forward. Rich ranchers, merchants, the mayor's son. Each one presented their credentials like supplicants before a throne. Each one was carefully considered and either accepted for courtship or politely declined. Nate waited. His stomach churned. His shirt, though clean, was patched at the elbows. His boots, though polished, showed years of hard wear. He didn't belong here, but loneliness makes fools of desperate men. He stepped forward. The crowd parted. Conversations died. Every eye turned to stare at the stranger with sun-darkened skin and working man's hands. Sheriff Hartwell's expression shifted from welcoming to contemptuous in a heartbeat. "And who might you be?" Nate's throat was dry, but his voice came out steady. "Nathaniel Brennan, sir. I've got a ranch north of here, 60 acres. Small, but it's mine, paid in full. By the law, any man with property has the right to a ranch." Someone in the crowd snorted. Probably a shack and 2 chickens. Laughter rippled through the gathering. Nate's jaw tightened. Heat crawled up his neck, but he held the sheriff's gaze. It's honest land, sir. I work it myself. I've got skills too. I can break horses, work cattle, build whatever needs building. I'm asking for the right to court one of your daughters. That's all. The sheriff crossed his arms. His eyes glittered with something ugly. Skills, you say? Yes, sir. Then prove it. Nate's gut twisted. He knew that tone, knew that look. He'd walked straight into a trap, and there was no backing out now. Not with the whole town watching. How do you want me to prove it? Sheriff Hartwell's grin widened, showing too many teeth. I've got a stallion. Black as midnight. Mean as the devil himself. 3 trainers tried to break him. 2 got trampled so bad they couldn't walk for a month. The 3rd ran off in the night scared for his life. The crowd leaned in, sensing blood sport. You tame that horse, Cowboy, and I'll give you my daughter. He turned, gesturing toward the platform where Annabelle stood. Nate's heart slammed against his ribs. His hands shook. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw his future. A beautiful wife. Children. Acceptance. Everything he'd ever wanted. I accept. The words left his mouth before his brain caught up. The sheriff's smile turned vicious. You've got 3 months. Come September, we'll see if you're still standing. Hell, we'll see if you're still breathing. The crowd erupted in cheers and laughter. Bets were immediately placed. Most gave Nate a week before he quit. Some said he wouldn't last 3 days. Nate barely heard them. He was staring at Annabelle, willing her to look at him. Just once. Just one glance to tell him she saw him. She yawned delicately behind her fan and turned away. But he'd earned that glance. He'd prove himself. He had to. This was his only shot at not dying alone. Chapter 2. Midnight. 2 days later, Nate rode up to the Hartwell Ranch just after dawn. The main house was massive, 2 stories of whitewashed wood wraparound porch, glass windows that sparkled in the early light. Behind it sat stables that were bigger than his entire cabin. And behind the stables, a separate corral built with reinforced timber beams. Nate heard the horse before he saw it. The thunder of hooves hitting wood, the crack of splintering beams. A scream that didn't sound like any horse Nate had ever heard. It sounded like fury given voice. He dismounted slowly, approaching the corral, with the caution of a man who'd been kicked in the head before and had no desire to repeat the experience. The stallion was massive. 17 hands at least, pure black except for a small white star on his forehead. Coat gleaming like oil. Muscles rippling under midnight skin. Eyes wild with rage. As Nate got closer, the horse charged the fence. The entire structure shook. Wood groaned. The animal reared up, hooves crashing down inches from where Nate stood. Jesus, Nate breathed. This wasn't just a wild horse. This was a killer. You the fool trying to tame him? Nate spun around. A young woman stood about 10 feet away holding a bucket of feed. Early 20s, round-faced with strawberry blonde hair tied back in a loose braid. Sweat dampened her forehead despite the morning cool. She was heavy-set, noticeably so, but her arms looked strong and she didn't seem afraid of the beast behind her. I'm Nathaniel Brennan, he said. I know who you are. Whole town's talking about the idiot who took Pa's bet. She walked past him toward the corral like she did this every day. The stallion charged again, snorting and kicking. She didn't flinch, just set the bucket down outside the fence and stepped back. Don't stand too close, she said quietly. He hates sudden movements. Nate watched as the horse circled, nostrils, flaring, muscles tense. Slowly, so slowly, the animal approached the bucket. You feed him every day. Pa doesn't trust the ranch hands near him anymore. Not after the last one got his ribs broken. And you're not afraid? She glanced at him, and something flickered in her hazel eyes. Pain, maybe, or resignation. He's just scared, she said softly. Scared things lash out. That's all they know how to do. The stallion kicked the fence again, and Nate jumped back instinctively. The woman didn't move. You're the sheriff's daughter, Nate said, realizing. She nodded. Josephine Hartwell. Folks call me Josie. He looked at her more closely now. She wasn't dressed like her sisters. No silk gown, just a simple cotton dress stained with dirt and sweat. Work clothes. Why are you out here? He asked. Shouldn't you be inside with your sisters? Her expression hardened. My sisters don't work. I do. She picked up the empty bucket and started walking back toward the house. Nate called after her. Wait, you know this horse. I need your help. She stopped, but didn't turn around. You made the bet, Cowboy. Not me. Then she was gone. Nate stood alone, staring at the black stallion. It stared back, eyes full of rage and pain. 3 months suddenly felt like forever. Chapter 3. The lesson. Nate showed up every morning before sunrise. The first week was brutal. He couldn't get within 10 feet of the stallion without it charging the fence. Twice it nearly broke through. Once it kicked so hard a wooden beam splintered, and Nate had to jump aside to avoid the flying splinters. His ribs were bruised from being thrown against the fence. His hands were torn raw from gripping rope. He went home each night exhausted, bleeding, and no closer to his goal. But he kept coming back. And every morning Josie was already there. She never said much. Just fed the horse, checked the water trough, hummed under her breath while she worked. The stallion still kicked and snorted, but it watched her, listened to her. One morning, after another failed attempt to get a rope on the animal, Nate sat in the dirt, breathing hard blood dripping from his knuckles. Josie walked over and set a canteen beside him. You're doing it wrong, she said. Nate looked up, wiping blood on his pants. Then tell me how to do it right. She hesitated, glancing toward the main house. Then she crouched down beside him, close enough that he could smell hay and sunshine on her skin. He's not mean. He's hurt. Hurt how? Look at his left side. See that scar? Nate squinted. There, along the horse's ribs, was a long, jagged line of raised skin. Someone cut him, Josie said quietly. Cut him over and over, trying to break his spirit. That's why he hates ropes. That's why he kicks when you come from the left. Nate's chest tightened. Your father did that. No, the man Pa bought him from. But Pa didn't care. He just wanted a stallion that looked tough for breeding. Didn't matter if the horse was ruined inside. She stood, brushing dust from her skirt. If you want to tame him, you have to earn his trust, not break him. Breaking's already been tried. It doesn't work. How do I earn his trust? She looked at him for a long moment. Start by not treating him like a beast. Treat him like something that's been hurt and needs time to heal. Over the next 2 weeks, Nate changed everything. He stopped trying to rope the horse, stopped trying to corner it. Instead, he just sat outside the corral, quiet, still. At first, the stallion ignored him, paced and snorted and kicked at shadows. But slowly, it began to settle. Josie came by most evenings after her chores were done. She taught him things no one else knew. He likes oats better than hay, but only at dusk. He calms down if you hum, not sing. Hum. Something low and steady. Never approach from the left, always the right. Always let him see you coming. Nate listened to every word, tried everything she suggested, and it started working. One evening, the stallion let Nate stand just 5 feet away without charging. Nate's heart pounded so hard he thought the horse might hear it, but he stayed calm, steady, breathing slow. Josie watched from the fence, arms crossed. You're learning, she said quietly. Nate glanced at her. Only because you're teaching me. She looked away, but he saw the faint color rise in her cheeks. Chapter 4. The Shift. By the end of the second month, Nate and Josie had fallen into a rhythm. She would finish her work in the main house, cooking, cleaning, mending all the things her sisters refused to do, then slip out to the stables. He would be there working with the horse, and they would talk. One night, sitting on the fence rail, watching the sunset, Nate told her things he'd never told anyone. Lost my parents in the war. I was 14. Worked other men's land for years just trying to survive. Saved every penny. Bought my ranch 3 years ago. He paused. It's not much, but it's mine. Josie listened, her expression soft in the fading light. Why come here? She asked. Why take Pa's bet? Nate looked down at his hands, scarred and calloused. Because I'm tired of being alone. Tired of people looking at me like I'm nothing. His voice dropped. I thought if I could prove myself, maybe I'd deserve something more. Maybe I'd deserve someone like Annabelle. Josie's face changed just for a second. Something painful flashed in her eyes. Then she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Annabelle doesn't even know your name, she said quietly. She will, once I tame this horse. Josie slid off the fence. Good luck, Nate. She walked away, and Nate didn't understand why her voice sounded so sad. But as the days passed, something shifted inside him. He found himself looking forward to Josie's arrival each evening, listening for her footsteps, the way she laughed at his terrible jokes, the way she could calm the stallion with just her voice. She wasn't like Annabelle. She didn't wear silk or smile prettily at men or play coy games. But she was real. She knew horses better than anyone he'd ever met. She was patient, smart, kind. She never once made him feel small. One afternoon, walking into town for supplies, Nate saw Annabelle. She rode past in an elegant carriage, laughing with her friends. Her dress shimmered in the sunlight. She was so beautiful, it almost hurt to look at her. She glanced at him briefly, then looked away, dismissing him as just another poor admirer beneath her notice. Nate's chest ached, but not as much as he thought it would. That evening, Josie brought him water and a piece of bread. You don't have to do that, he said. I know. She sat beside him in the dirt, and they watched the stallion together in comfortable silence. Why do you help me? He finally asked. Josie didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was barely above a whisper. Because you're the first person who ever asked. Nate looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time he saw past everything the town saw. Past her size, past the way her family treated her. He saw Josie. But Annabelle was still the dream, the goal, the prize he'd been working toward for 3 months. He couldn't give up now. Chapter 5. The Defense. One evening, Nate stopped at the Red Bluff Saloon for a drink. He was exhausted, sore, but feeling hopeful. The stallion had let him touch its neck that afternoon. Actually, touch it. Progress. He was halfway through his whiskey when he heard the laughter from the corner table. Heard Cole's been spending time with the sheriff's fat daughter? Nate's hand froze on his glass. Poor bastard. Probably thinks she'll put in a good word for him with Annabelle. More laughter. Or maybe he's got low standards. Figure he knows he ain't getting the pretty one, so he's settling early. The table erupted in guffaws. Nate's vision went red. He didn't remember crossing the room, didn't remember his fist connecting with the man's collar. But suddenly he had the speaker, a ranch hand named Dutch, slammed against the wall, forearm pressed against his throat. Say another word about her. Nate growled, his voice deadly quiet. Say one more goddamn word and I'll break your jaw. The saloon went silent. Dutch's face went pale, then red. I didn't mean nothing. Yes, you did. You meant every word. Nate pressed harder. And if I hear you or anyone else disrespect her again, you'll answer to me. We clear? Clear, Dutch choked out. Nate released him and stepped back. His hands were shaking. The whole saloon stared at him. He threw coins on the bar for his drink and walked out into the night. Behind him, whispers started immediately. Josie heard about it the next day. She was in the general store when Mrs. Calloway leaned over the counter, eyes gleaming with gossip. "Did you hear that cowboy of yours nearly killed Dutch Miller last night? Slammed him against the wall at the saloon. All because Dutch made a little joke about you." The other women in the store tittered. Josie's hands shook as she paid for flour. "He's not my cowboy," she said quietly. "Well, he defended you like you were his. Must have some feelings there." Mrs. Calloway's smile was cruel. "Though I can't imagine what kind. Pity, maybe." Laughter followed Josie out of the store. But that night when she brought Nate his water, she didn't say anything. Just sat beside him closer than usual. "Thank you," she finally whispered. "For what?" "For what you did. At the saloon." Nate looked at her confused. "How did you—" "Small town. Everyone knows everything." She smiled, but her eyes were wet. "No one's ever defended me before." Nate wanted to say something. Wanted to tell her she deserved to be defended. That she deserved so much more than this town gave her. But the words stuck in his throat. Because tomorrow was the day. Tomorrow he would tame the stallion. Tomorrow he would claim his bride. Tomorrow his life would change forever. Chapter 6. The Triumph. September arrived with a crisp morning wind that smelled like autumn and endings. Word had spread fast. By mid-morning, the town square was packed. Men, women, children, everyone wanted to see if the outsider cowboy would succeed or die trying. Sheriff Hartwell stood on the platform, arms crossed, grinning like a man who'd already won. Annabelle stood beside him in a dress the color of summer grass. Magnolia flanked her in lavender. Both looked bored, fanning themselves in the heat. Josie stood at the back of the crowd, almost hidden. She wore a plain cotton dress, her hair tied back simply. She looked like she wanted to disappear. Nate led the black stallion into the square. The crowd gasped. The horse was calm. Its coat gleamed like polished obsidian. Its eyes were steady, watchful, but not wild. Not anymore. "That can't be the same horse," someone whispered. He actually did it. Nate didn't respond to the murmurs. He kept his focus on the stallion, one hand on its neck, the other holding the reins loosely. 3 months of work. 3 months of blood and patience and learning to listen instead of force. He wasn't going to ruin it now by showing fear. The sheriff stepped forward, eyebrows raised in genuine surprise. "Well, I'll be damned. You got a rope on him?" "I did more than that," Nate said. He swung himself onto the stallion's back. The crowd held its breath. The horse shifted, muscles tensing beneath Nate's legs. For one terrible moment, it looked like it might buck. But then Nate leaned forward, murmuring something only the horse could hear, words Josie had taught him, and the stallion relaxed. Nate guided it forward. Walking slowly around the square, then a trot, then a canter. The horse obeyed every command. Smooth, controlled, powerful. The crowd erupted in cheers. Nate rode back to the platform and dismounted, handing the reins to one of the ranch hands. He turned to face the sheriff, his heart pounding so hard he could barely hear over the blood rushing in his ears. "I kept my end of the deal," he said, voice steady, despite everything. "Now keep yours." The sheriff's grin faltered. The crowd leaned in, waiting. Sheriff Hartwell glanced at Annabelle, then back at Nate. The whole town was watching. He'd been cornered. He couldn't back out now. But the look in his eyes was pure venom. "A deal's a deal," the sheriff said slowly. He turned toward his daughters. The crowd murmured excitedly. Annabelle straightened, her expression carefully neutral. But the sheriff's hand moved past her, past Magnolia. His arm extended toward the back of the crowd. "Josephine, get up here." The murmurs turned to gasps. Josie's face went white. People turned to stare. Some looked confused. Others started snickering. "He said his daughter," someone whispered loudly. "Didn't say which one." Laughter began to ripple through the crowd like poison spreading through water. Josie stood frozen, rooted to the spot, every eye on her, every mouth whispering. The sheriff's voice boomed. "Come on, girl. Don't be shy." More laughter, louder now. Josie forced herself to move. Each step felt like walking through fire. The crowd parted their faces, a blur of cruel amusement. She climbed onto the platform on legs that barely held her. The sheriff grabbed her arm and pulled her forward, presenting her to Nate like a cruel punchline. "You wanted a daughter, Cowboy. Here she is, my daughter." The crowd erupted. Men slapped their knees. Women covered their mouths, eyes gleaming with malicious delight. Children pointed and giggled, not understanding the cruelty, but feeding off the adults' energy. Annabelle looked away, embarrassed to even be associated with the scene. Magnolia examined her nails like nothing was happening. And Josie stood there, head bowed, tears streaming down her face. Nate stared at the sheriff, then at Josie. His chest felt like someone had driven a spike through it. Rage flooded through him. Rage at the sheriff, at the town, at the cruelty of it all. He'd worked for 3 months, bled, suffered, earned this, and they'd turned it into a joke. He looked at Annabelle standing there, beautiful and relieved. Relieved she didn't have to marry him. His dream shattering like glass. Then he looked at Josie's face. The tears, the shame, the humiliation. She didn't deserve this. But the deal was made. Publicly, legally. If he refused now, he'd lose everything, his honor, his reputation, any chance of building a life here. He had no choice. Nate stepped forward. The laughter quieted slightly, everyone watching to see what he'd do. He reached out and gently lifted Josie's chin, forcing her to look at him. Her eyes were swimming with tears, full of pain and apology. "You think you've shamed me?" Nate said, his voice ringing across the square. He turned to face the crowd. "She's the reason I tamed that horse. Not luck, not skill, her." He pointed at Josie. "She taught me everything. She worked beside me every single day for 3 months while the rest of you sat on your porches and laughed." The crowd went silent. "She's worth more than every single one of you combined." He turned back to Josie, and his voice softened. "And I'll honor my word." Josie's eyes went wide. Fresh tears spilled over, but this time they weren't just tears of shame. They were something more complicated. Gratitude. Disbelief. And underneath it all, a terrible understanding. Because she could see it in his eyes, the disappointment, the bitterness, the resignation. He wasn't choosing her. He was accepting her because he had no other choice. Nate took her hand. It was cold and trembling in his. "Come on," he said quietly. He led her down from the platform. The crowd stood frozen, unsure how to react. As they walked away, the whispers began. "Poor fool. Thought he'd get Annabelle. Sheriff played him good. That marriage won't last a year." Josie heard every word. So did Nate. And neither of them spoke as they walked toward an uncertain future, bound together by honor and cruelty, with no idea how to bridge the impossible distance between duty and desire. The wedding happened 1 week later in the small church at the edge of town. Required by law to seal the deal, the preacher said. Required by honor. Nate told himself, though, the word felt hollow in his mouth. The church was nearly empty. Preacher Morton stood at the altar, Bible in hand, looking uncomfortable. 2 witnesses sat in the front pew because the law demanded it. Tobias Grant, the blacksmith, and Mrs. Eleanor Murphy, who ran the boarding house on Main Street. Both had kind faces. Both looked at Josie with something close to sympathy. Sheriff Hartwell didn't come. Sent word he was needed at the jail. Emergency, he claimed, though everyone knew there hadn't been trouble in Red Bluff for months. Annabelle sent a note. Brief. Impersonal. Congratulations on your union. Nothing more. The paper smelled like expensive perfume, and Nate had crumpled it in his fist before Josie could see. Josie wore a simple dress. Not white, she owned nothing white. Just a clean cotton dress in pale blue, the nicest thing she had. She'd tried to do something with her hair pinned up properly, but her hands had shaken so badly she'd given up and just braided it. Nate wore his cleanest shirt and his only pair of pants without patches. He'd shaved that morning, cut himself twice, and given up halfway through. They stood before the preacher like strangers, because that's what they were. "Dearly beloved," Preacher Morton began, and his voice echoed in the empty church like an accusation. Nate barely heard the words. His mind was elsewhere. On the ranch he'd be taking Josie to tomorrow. On the life he'd imagined with Annabelle candlelit dinners, intelligent conversation children who would inherit her beauty, on everything he'd lost. "Do you, Nathaniel Brennan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Nate's throat was dry. "I do." "And do you, Josephine Hartwell, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Josie's voice was barely a whisper. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I pronounce you man and wife." The preacher paused. "You may kiss the bride." Nate turned to Josie. She looked up at him with those hazel eyes, and he saw everything there: fear, resignation, a desperate hope she was trying to hide. He leaned in and kissed her cheek, briefly, like a brother might kiss a sister. Josie's face fell. Behind them, Mrs. Murphy dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Tobias cleared his throat loudly, and just like that, it was done. They rode to Nate's ranch in silence. Josie sat in the wagon beside him, hands folded in her lap, staring at the road ahead. She'd brought only one trunk, all her belongings fit in a single battered chest that had belonged to her mother. The ranch appeared as the sun began to set. A small wooden cabin, weathered but sturdy. A barn that leaned slightly to the left. A corral. A few acres of grazing land stretching toward the mountains. It was humble, simple, lonely. "It's not much," Nate said, breaking the silence for the first time in an hour. "But it's sound. Roof doesn't leak. Stove works. Well, water's clean." "It's fine," Josie said quietly. Nate helped her down from the wagon, careful not to touch her more than necessary. He carried her trunk inside while she stood in the yard looking around at her new home. The cabin was one room, a bed in the corner, a small table with 2 chairs, a stove, shelves with a few dishes, a rocking chair by the window. Everything neat and clean but sparse. The home of a man who'd been alone for too long. Nate set the trunk at the foot of the bed. "You can put your things wherever you like. There's space in the shelf there, and I'll build you more if you need it." "Thank you." The words hung between them, formal and distant. "I'll sleep in the barn," Nate said. Until you're more comfortable." Josie's cheeks colored. "You don't have to do that. This is your home. I'm the one intruding." "You're my wife." The words felt strange in his mouth. "You should have the bed." "Nate." "It's settled." He walked out before she could argue further, closing the door quietly behind him. Josie stood alone in the cabin, surrounded by another man's life, and let herself cry. The first week passed in awkward politeness. Josie woke before dawn to make breakfast. Nate ate quickly and thanked her, then disappeared to work the land. She cleaned the cabin, tended a small garden she found behind the house, tried to make herself useful. At supper, they sat across from each other at the small table. Nate complimented her cooking. Josie asked about his day. He answered in brief sentences. Then silence. At night, Nate retreated to the barn. Josie lay alone in the bed that smelled like him leather and hay, and something indefinably masculine, and stared at the ceiling. This was her life now. A wife, but not really. A partner, but not really. Existing in the same space as a man who looked at her with distant courtesy and nothing more. On the 8th day, Josie went into town for supplies. She'd put it off as long as she could, but they needed flour and coffee, and she couldn't avoid Red Bluff forever. The moment she walked into the general store, the whispers started. Mrs. Calloway smiled tightly from behind the counter. Well, if it isn't Mrs. Brennan. How's married life treating you, dear? The other women in the store tittered like birds. Must be hard, Mrs. Patterson said loudly, knowing your husband wanted your sister. Poor man worked so hard, added Mrs. Whitmore, just to end up with well. Laughter rippled through the store like a disease. Josie's hands shook as she gathered her supplies. She paid quickly, counting out coins with fingers that wouldn't stay steady. At least he's honorable, Mrs. Calloway said as Josie headed for the door. Most men would have refused. Can't blame him for sleeping in the barn, though. Who could blame him? More laughter followed Josie out into the street. She made it halfway to the wagon before she had to stop pressing her hand against a post to steady herself. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to shed in public. You all right, Miss Josie? She looked up. Tobias Grant stood in the doorway of his blacksmith shop, hammer in hand, concern on his dark face. I'm fine, she managed. Don't look fine. He set the hammer down and walked over. Those biddies giving you trouble? It's nothing I didn't expect. Expecting it doesn't make it hurt less. He glanced toward the store. Your husband know they're talking about you like that. He has enough to worry about without me adding to it. Tobias studied her for a moment. You're a good woman, Miss Josie. Better than most folks in this town deserve. Don't let them make you forget that. Thank you, Mr. Grant. Tobias. Just Tobias. He tipped his hat. You need anything at all, you come see me. Understand? Josie nodded, not trusting her voice. When she got home, Nate was in the corral working with a young mare. She unloaded the supplies in silence, put everything away, and started supper. She didn't tell him what happened in town. What was the point? Three weeks into the marriage, Nate rode into town. He needed to pick up some equipment the blacksmith had repaired, and he'd been putting it off, but the plow wouldn't wait any longer. He was tying his horse outside Tobias's shop when he saw her. Annabelle walking down the street with Magnolia and a group of their friends. She wore a dress the color of cream, and her dark hair was pinned up with pearl combs. She looked like something out of a painting. Nate's chest tightened. She glanced his way. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Something flickered across her face. Was it regret? Curiosity? Then she looked away and continued walking, laughing at something one of her friends said. Nate stood there watching her disappear around the corner. His heart ached. Not as sharply as it had a month ago, but still. That should have been his life. Walking into town with a beautiful wife on his arm, people tipping their hats with respect instead of whispering behind his back. A future full of promise instead of this hollow existence. You gonna stand there all day, or you gonna come get your equipment? Nate turned. Tobias stood in the doorway of his shop, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Sorry, was just, I know what you were doing. Tobias stepped aside to let Nate enter. Seen you looking at the oldest Hartwell girl since you arrived in Red Bluff. Wondering what might have been. Nate didn't deny it. The equipment ready. It's ready. Tobias walked to the back of the shop and returned with the repaired plow blade. Gonna cost you $2. Nate counted out the money. You were at the wedding. I was. Why? Tobias met his eyes. Someone needed to bear witness that wasn't doing it out of obligation or cruelty. Figured that someone should be me. Nate took the blade. Appreciate it. You know what I don't appreciate, Tobias said, voice hardening. The way you're treating that girl. Nate stiffened. I've been nothing but respectful. Respectful ain't the same as kind. Respectful ain't the same as being a husband. Tobias leaned against his workbench. I see her come into town. I see the way those women tear her apart with their words. And I see her go home to a man who's so busy mourning what he lost that he can't see what he's got. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Tobias's voice was quiet but fierce. I was a slave, Brennan, owned by a man who fed me and gave me a place to sleep and called himself generous. You know what that taught me? That there's different kinds of cruelty. The obvious kind, sure. But also the kind that comes from being around someone who doesn't want you, who looks at you and wishes you were someone else. That kind of cruelty is slow, quiet, but it kills just as sure. Nate's jaw clenched. I married her. I'm providing for her. What more do you want? I want you to stop sleeping in the barn like you're ashamed of her. I want you to stop looking at other women like your wife is invisible. I want you to give that girl a chance. Tobias straightened. She didn't ask for this any more than you did. Difference is, she's trying. What are you doing? Nate left without answering, but Tobias's words followed him all the way home. That night, Josie made stew. Nate's favorite, though he'd never told her that. She'd just paid attention, noticed which meals he ate with more enthusiasm, which ones he thanked her for twice. They ate in silence as usual. The scrape of spoons against bowls. The crackle of the fire in the stove. The weight of everything unsaid pressing down on them like a physical thing. This is good, Nate said finally. Thank you. You're welcome. More silence. Nate set down his spoon. Josie, You don't have to explain. Her voice was calm, resigned. I understand. Understand what? Why you sleep in the barn. Why you can barely look at me. Why you... Her voice cracked slightly. I understand. Nate's chest tightened. Josie, I know you didn't want this. Didn't want me. She looked down at her hands. I know you wanted Annabelle. I know this marriage is a punishment for you. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry I'm not. I'm sorry I'm not her. The words hung in the air like smoke. Nate wanted to deny it. Wanted to say something that would ease the pain in her voice. But the words wouldn't come because they'd be a lie, and Josie deserved better than lies. I'll try harder. Josie continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll be a better wife. I'll cook what you like and keep the house clean and stay out of your way and... Stop. Nate's voice came out harsher than he intended. Just stop. Josie flinched. Nate stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You don't need to be better. You're... He ran a hand through his hair, frustration and guilt warring inside him. This isn't your fault. Then whose fault is it? Josie's eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. Your father's for making the bet mine, for being born God's, for making me the way I am. That's not what I see the way you look at me, Nate. Or rather, the way you don't look at me. I'm in this house in your life, and it's like I'm invisible. Like I'm something to be endured. A tear slipped down her cheek. Do you know what that feels like? To be around someone every day who wishes you were anyone else. Nate's throat closed. Because Tobias was right. God help him. Tobias was right. I'm trying, he said, and his voice cracked on the words. I'm trying, Josie. I need time. Time to what? Time to stop resenting me. Time to forgive me for existing. She stood wiping her eyes. I can't give you time to love me, Nate. I can't make you want me. I can only be who I am, and if that's not enough, then... She broke off, wrapping her arms around herself. Then what? Nate asked quietly. Then maybe Tobias was right. Maybe this was a mistake. She walked to the door, grabbing her shawl. Where are you going? For a walk. I need air. She left before he could stop her. Nate stood in the empty cabin, surrounded by the smell of her cooking and the echoes of her words, and felt something crack inside his chest. Bleh. Josie walked without direction, just needing to be away from the cabin, away from the weight of Nate's silent disappointment. The moon was bright enough to see by, and her feet carried her toward the barn, almost without thought. The black stallion, Midnight she'd named him in her head, though she'd never said it aloud, nickered softly when she approached. "Hey boy," she whispered, reaching through the fence to stroke his nose. "You remember me, don't you?" The horse pushed against her hand, gentle despite his size. "At least someone's happy to see me." She climbed over the fence and sat in the dirt, leaning against the post. Midnight stood nearby, a solid presence in the darkness. "I don't know what I'm doing," she told the horse. "I thought if I was a good wife, if I worked hard and didn't complain, maybe he'd see me. Really see me." She laughed bitterly. "But you can't make someone love you, can you? You can't earn it. Either they do or they don't." Midnight lowered his head, breath warm against her hair. "Pa was right about one thing. I'm not enough. Never have been." Her voice broke. "Annabelle got the beauty. Magnolia got the charm. And I got what? The ability to cook and clean and be invisible. That's not a life. That's just existing." She pressed her face against the horse's neck and let herself cry. Really cry for the first time since the wedding. All the pain and humiliation and loneliness she'd been holding back came pouring out in great wrenching sobs. She didn't hear Nate approach. He stood at the fence watching his wife break down in the moonlight and felt like the worst kind of bastard. Because Tobias was right. She was trying. She'd been trying from the beginning. And what had he done? Treated her like an obligation, a burden, a constant reminder of his failure. He'd been so focused on what he'd lost that he couldn't see what he had. Josie was kind, patient, skilled with animals in a way that bordered on magical. She cooked meals that tasted like home, kept the cabin cleaner than it had ever been, never complained about the hard work or the isolation. And he'd repaid her by making her feel invisible. Nate climbed over the fence. Josie heard him and jerked upright, hastily wiping her face. "I'm sorry. I'll come back to the cabin. I just needed—" "Don't apologize." Nate sat down beside her in the dirt, not too close, but closer than he'd been since the wedding. "I'm the one who should apologize." Josie shook her head. "You haven't done anything wrong." "I've done everything wrong." He stared up at the stars, searching for the right words. "I've been cruel to you. Not with my hands or my words, but with my silence, my distance. And you didn't deserve that. You didn't deserve any of this. Neither did you. Maybe not. But I made a choice when I took that bet. I knew the risks. And when it went wrong, I took it out on you instead of your father where it belonged." He looked at her. "I'm sorry, Josie. I'm so damn sorry." She was quiet for a long moment. "You still want her?" It wasn't a question. Nate wanted to lie. Wanted to say the right thing. But Josie deserved honesty even if it hurt. "Part of me does," he admitted. "Part of me looks at Annabelle and sees everything I thought I wanted. Everything I thought would make me matter." He paused. "But another part of me knows that wanting and loving aren't the same thing. I wanted Annabelle because of what she represented. I didn't know her. Still don't. And you don't know me either." "No," Nate said quietly. "But I'd like to." Josie turned to look at him, and in the moonlight, he could see the tear tracks on her cheeks, the hope and fear warring in her expression. "I can't promise I'll be a perfect husband," Nate continued. "I can't promise I'll stop being an idiot overnight. But I can promise to try. To actually try, not just go through the motions, to see you instead of looking past you." He held out his hand. "Can we start over?" Josie stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment. Then slowly, she took it. "I'd like that," she whispered. They sat in the dirt together, hands linked, and for the first time since the wedding, the silence between them wasn't heavy with resentment. It was just silence. And that was enough. The next morning, Nate moved his belongings back into the cabin. He didn't make a big deal of it, just brought his bedroll and spare clothes in while Josie was making breakfast. She noticed, but didn't comment. Just smiled slightly and poured him coffee. That afternoon, while working in the field, Nate heard horses approaching. He looked up to see Clayton Merrick riding onto his property with two of his father's ranch hands flanking him. Clayton was the same age as Nate, but that's where the similarities ended. Son of the wealthiest rancher in 3 counties, Clayton wore expensive clothes and a smug expression that made Nate's fists itch. "Brennan," Clayton called out, reining in his horse. "Got a proposition for you." Nate set down his shovel. "Not interested." "You haven't heard it yet." Clayton dismounted, looking around at the small ranch with obvious disdain. "This is a lot of work for one man, especially with winter coming. Must be hard keeping this place going." "I manage, for now. But what about next year, year after that?" Clayton smiled. "My father's willing to make you an offer. Fair price for your land. You could take the money, start fresh somewhere else. Somewhere your wife might be happier." The way he said wife made Nate's blood boil. "Land's not for sale." "Everyone's got a price, Brennan. Think about it. You could go anywhere, do anything. You wouldn't be tied to this place anymore. Wouldn't be tied to well." Clayton's smile widened. "You could be free." "I am free. This is my land and I'm staying on it." "Shame." Clayton remounted his horse. "Offer stands for another month. After that, well, winter's hard in these parts. Lots of things can happen. Accidents, tragedies." His eyes glinted. "Think about it." He rode off with his men, leaving Nate standing in the field with dread settling in his gut like a stone. That night he told Josie about the visit. "Clayton Merrick's always wanted to expand his father's land," she said quietly. "Your property borders theirs to the north. If he could buy you out, he'd have access to the creek year-round. He's not getting my land. What if he tries to force you? Then I'll fight." Josie looked at him across the table. "Why? Why is this place so important to you?" Nate thought about it. "Because it's mine. First thing I ever owned that somebody else didn't give me, or that I didn't earn by breaking my back for someone else's profit. This land means I'm not nobody. Means I have a stake in something." He paused, meeting her eyes. "And now it means you have a home. That makes it worth fighting for." Josie's breath caught. It was the first time since the wedding that he'd said something that made her feel like she belonged instead of just existed. "Then we'll fight," she said. We. Her jaw set with determination Nate had only seen when she worked with horses. "This is my home too now. I'm not losing it without a fight." And looking at her, really looking at her, seeing the strength beneath the softness, the steel beneath the gentleness, Nate felt something shift in his chest. Not love, not yet, but maybe the beginning of something that could become love given time. The following week, Nate woke before dawn to find Josie already up, dressed and heading toward the barn. "Where are you going?" he asked, pulling on his boots. "To help you with the morning work. You've been doing it alone too long." "Josie, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." She turned to face him. "You said we'd try, both of us, so I'm trying." Nate nodded slowly. "All right then, let's get to work." They fell into a rhythm over the following days. Josie proved herself capable with the livestock, gentle but firm, with the horses patient, with the milk cow efficient, with the chickens. She worked without complaint, even when the work was hard or dirty. And Nate found himself talking to her. Really talking, not just exchanging pleasantries. He told her about the war, about watching his father march off and never come back. About his mother wasting away from grief and fever. About years of being passed from one job to another, never belonging anywhere. She told him about growing up in her father's house, always the afterthought, always the one who wasn't quite good enough. About teaching herself to read by stealing books from Annabelle's room. About finding solace with the horses when people became too painful. "Your sisters never helped with the ranch work?" Nate asked one evening as they sat on the porch after supper. "God, no. Pa wouldn't hear of it. Said they were meant for better things." Josie's voice was matter-of-fact, like she'd long since accepted the unfairness. I was meant for work. They were meant for marriage to important men. Seems to me you were meant for better things than they were. Josie looked at him surprised. You can do everything they can do, Nate continued. Cook clean, look presentable when you need to, but you can also do everything I can do. Work land, train horses, fix a fence. That's not common. That's rare. Her eyes filled with tears. You mean that I don't say things I don't mean? She looked away, overwhelmed. Thank you. They sat in silence watching the sun set, and this time the silence felt almost comfortable. Almost. Because Nate still slept on his side of the bed, and Josie on hers, a careful distance between them. Because Nate still sometimes caught himself thinking about Annabelle when he went into town. Because love couldn't be forced or rushed, and they both knew it. But they were trying. And for now, that was enough. October brought the first real cold snap, and with it trouble that had been brewing since Clayton Merrick's visit. Nate woke one morning to find 3 of his fence posts pulled up and thrown into the creek. The wire was cut clean through, and half his cattle had wandered onto Merrick land during the night. Son of a bitch, he muttered, staring at the damage. Josie came up behind him, shawl wrapped tight against the wind. Clayton. Who else? Nate kicked at one of the downed posts. He's sending a message, trying to make this place too much trouble to keep. What are you going to do? Fix it. What else can I do? He looked at her jaw tight with frustration. But I need to get the cattle back first, and that means going onto Merrick property, which is exactly what Clayton wants, an excuse to cause more trouble. Then I'll come with you. Josie. 2 people are harder to ambush than 1, and I can handle a horse as well as you can. She met his eyes with that quiet determination he was learning to recognize. We're partners. Now remember? You don't get to protect me by leaving me behind. Nate wanted to argue, but the set of her jaw told him it would be pointless. All right, but you stay close to me, and if anything happens, you ride straight home. Understand? I understand you're giving me orders you know I won't follow. Despite everything, Nate almost smiled. Just stay safe. They rode out together as the sun climbed higher, following the tracks of the wandering cattle. It took them 2 hours to round up the animals and drive them back toward Nate's land. They were almost to the property line when riders appeared on the ridge above them. Clayton sat his horse like he owned the world, flanked by 4 ranch hands. His smile was all teeth and no warmth. Well, well, looks like we got cattle thieves, boys. These are my cattle, Nate called back, keeping his voice steady. They wandered onto your land because someone cut my fence. That's so funny I don't see any brands on them. You know damn well they're mine, Clayton. Now let us pass. Clayton urged his horse down the slope, his men following. They formed a loose circle around Nate and Josie, cutting off the easy paths back. See, that's the problem with having such a small operation, Clayton said conversationally. Things get confused. Property lines get blurry. Sometimes cattle end up where they don't belong, and there's no way to prove who they belong to. Move aside, Merrick. Or what? You gonna fight all 5 of us? Clayton's gaze slid to Josie, and his smile widened. Though I gotta say I'm surprised. Didn't think the fat Hartwell girl could ride. Figured she'd break any horse she sat on. The men laughed. Josie's face went white, but she sat straighter in the saddle. Nate's vision tunneled. Blood roared in his ears. His hand moved toward the rifle in his saddle holster. Don't, Josie said quietly, urgently. That's what he wants. Don't give him the excuse. Listen to your wife, Brennan, Clayton said, still grinning. She's smarter than she looks, though that ain't saying much. More laughter. Nate's hand was shaking with the effort of not reaching for his gun. You got 5 seconds to move, Clayton. After that, I don't care what happens. Something in Nate's voice must have convinced Clayton he was serious, because the rancher's smile faltered slightly. He gestured to his men, and they pulled their horses aside, creating a narrow gap. "Go on then, take your cattle." Clayton leaned forward in his saddle. "But the offer still stands. 1 month, Brennan. After that, things might get a lot more difficult for you out here, especially with winter coming. Awful lot of accidents happen in winter. Fires, illnesses, people freezing to death because they got lost in a storm." His eyes flicked to Josie. "Be a real shame if something happened to your wife." Nate urged his horse forward, moving slowly, Josie right beside him. The cattle followed, nervous from the tension, but moving. They passed through the gap in Clayton's men, and Nate didn't breathe easy until they were a quarter-mile away and back on his own land. Only then did he look at Josie. Her face was composed, but her hands gripped the reins so tight her knuckles were white. "You all right?" "I'm fine." "Josie." "I said I'm fine." Her voice cracked. "I've heard worse. From my own family. From people I've known my whole life. Clayton Merrick calling me fat is nothing new." "It's not nothing," Nate said fiercely. "And I wanted to." "You wanted to shoot him. I know. But then you'd be in jail, and I'd be alone, and Clayton would get your land anyway." She finally looked at him, and her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. "You protected me by not doing what you wanted to do. That matters more than you know." They rode the rest of the way in silence, but when they reached the barn and dismounted, Nate did something he hadn't done since the wedding. He pulled Josie into a brief, awkward embrace. "Thank you," he said, "for being smarter than me." She stood frozen in his arms for a moment, then slowly relaxed, her forehead resting against his chest. "We make a good team." "Yeah," Nate said quietly. "We do." It was the first time he'd held her, and it felt both strange and right in a way he couldn't quite name. That night, Nate couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Clayton's threats over and over. The man wasn't bluffing. He'd seen it in Clayton's eyes, the certainty that he could take what he wanted through intimidation or force, and there'd be no consequences. On the other side of the bed, separated by 2 feet of space that felt like miles, Josie was also awake. He could tell by her breathing. "You thinking about Clayton?" she asked softly. "Yeah. Me too." She shifted, turning to face him in the darkness. "What are we going to do?" "I don't know. If I go to the sheriff, he'll side with the Merricks. They've got money and influence. I've got nothing." "You have me." Something in the way she said it made Nate's chest tighten. He turned his head to look at her. In the moonlight coming through the window, he could see her face open and earnest and scared, but trying not to show it. "I know," he said, "and that scares me more than Clayton does." "What do you mean?" "I mean, if this was just me, I'd fight him straight up. But now I've got you to think about, and the thought of something happening to you because of my stubbornness?" He broke off. "I couldn't live with that." Josie was quiet for a long moment. "You really mean that?" "Of course I mean it. It's just..." She took a shaky breath. "No one's ever worried about me before. Not like that. Not like I mattered enough to worry about." Nate reached across the space between them and found her hand. Her fingers were cold. He wrapped them in his and held on. "You matter," he said. "More than you know." They fell asleep like that, hands linked across the distance. And when Nate woke in the morning, Josie was curled against his side, her head on his shoulder, their fingers still intertwined. He didn't move. Didn't want to wake her. Didn't want to break whatever fragile thing was building between them. For the first time since the wedding, he didn't think about Annabelle at all. 3 days later, disaster struck in a way Nate hadn't anticipated. The unseasonably warm October gave way to a sudden cold snap, and with it came news from town that made his blood run cold. Drought. The creek that ran through the northern properties, including Clayton's land, had run nearly dry. Water was scarce, and with winter coming, every rancher in the territory was scrambling to secure enough for their livestock. Nate's land had a well, a good deep well that had never run dry even in the worst years. It was one of the reasons he'd bought this particular property. It was also, he realized with growing dread, exactly what Clayton Merrick needed. Sure enough, 2 days after the drought announcement, Clayton showed up at Nate's door. This time he came alone, and his manner was different, still arrogant, but with a layer of false friendliness that was somehow worse than open hostility. "Brennan, got a minute?" Nate stood in the doorway, not inviting him in. "Say what you came to say." "I'll cut right to it. You got good water. I need water. I'm prepared to pay you for access, fair price, regular delivery. Enough to make it worth your while." "Not interested." Clayton's smile tightened. "You haven't heard my offer." "Don't need to. Water's not for sale." "Be reasonable. I'm talking about good money here. Money you could use. And all I'm asking for is enough water to keep my father's herd alive through winter. That's not an unreasonable request." "Request denied." Nate started to close the door. Clayton's boot shot out, blocking it. "You're making a mistake. The only mistake I made was not running you off my property the first time you showed up. Don't make me correct that mistake now." For a moment, something ugly flashed in Clayton's eyes. Then he smiled again, that cold, calculating smile that made Nate's skin crawl. "You know what I think? I think you're letting your wife make decisions for you. I think she's got you so twisted up you can't think straight. That's what happens when a man marries beneath him. He starts acting beneath himself." Nate's fist connected with Clayton's jaw before he'd consciously decided to throw the punch. Clayton stumbled backward, landing hard in the dirt. Blood trickled from his split lip. "Get off my land," Nate said quietly. "And don't come back. Next time I won't use my fist. I'll use my rifle." Clayton stood slowly, wiping blood from his mouth. "You just made the worst mistake of your life, Brennan. Get out." Clayton left, but his words hung in the air like a curse. Josie appeared from the barn where she'd been watching. "You shouldn't have hit him." "I know. He'll use that against you. Claim you attacked him unprovoked." "I know that too." Nate looked at her. "But I'd do it again. He talked about you like you were something shameful. And I'm done letting people do that." Josie's eyes filled with tears. "Why? Why does it matter what people say about me?" "Because you're my wife." The words came out fiercer than he intended. "Because you work harder than anyone I know. Because you're kind and smart and skilled, and anyone who can't see that is a damn fool." He stepped closer. "And because somewhere along the way I started caring about you. Really caring, and I'm tired of pretending I don't." Josie stared at him, tears spilling over. "Nate, I'm not saying I'm in love with you. Not yet. But I'm saying I could be. Given time. If you'll have me." He took her hands in his. "I'm saying I want to try. Not because I have to, because I want to." She was crying in earnest now, but she was also smiling. "You mean it. Every word." She threw her arms around him, and this time Nate didn't hesitate. He held her tight, burying his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of her hay and sunshine, and something sweet he couldn't name. "I've wanted you to see me for so long," she whispered against his chest. "I've wanted you to want me. Not Annabelle. Me." "I see you," Nate said. "God help me, I finally see you." They stood there in the yard holding each other, and for one perfect moment, nothing else mattered. Not Clayton's threats, not the drought, not the judgment of the town, or the ghosts of what might have been. Just this, just them. The moment was shattered by the sound of horses approaching at speed. Nate pulled away from Josie, instinctively moving her behind him as 5 riders thundered into the yard. Sheriff Hartwell led them, his face grim. Behind him rode 2 of his deputies and 2 men Nate recognized as working for the Merrick Ranch. "Nathaniel Brennan," the sheriff called out, his voice carrying the weight of official business. "You're under arrest for assault." Nate's gut dropped. "On whose say-so?" "Clayton Merrick filed a complaint. Says you attacked him unprovoked on your property." The sheriff dismounted, pulling out iron shackles. Now, I don't particularly care about the details. My job is to bring you in." "He's lying." Josie stepped forward, voice shaking but determined. "Clayton provoked him. He insulted us both. He... That... So." The sheriff's gaze slid over his daughter with barely concealed contempt. "And you're an unbiased witness, are you? A wife defending her husband? I'm telling the truth. Truth don't matter much when it's one man's word against another's, and one of those men is a Merrick." The sheriff grabbed Nate's arm. "Come peacefully, or we'll make this difficult." Nate met Josie's eyes. Terror and fury warred in her expression, but underneath it all was something else, a plea for him to not make this worse. He let the sheriff shackle him without resistance. "How long will they hold him?" Josie asked, her voice barely steady. "Judge comes through next week. Until then, he'll sit in jail." The sheriff hauled Nate toward one of the horses. "You want to help your husband get him a lawyer, though I doubt you can afford one." They dragged Nate away, and the last thing he saw was Josie standing alone in the yard, her hands pressed over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Yeah, the Red Bluff jail was a small stone building that smelled like piss and despair. Nate's cell was barely 6 feet by 6 feet, with a cot that had more rust than metal and a bucket in the corner that reeked. He sat on the cot and tried not to think about Josie alone at the ranch. Tried not to think about Clayton using this opportunity to cause more trouble. Tried not to think about the fact that the legal system in this territory was bought and paid for by men with money and influence, men like the Merricks. He lost track of time in the windowless cell. Could have been hours, could have been days. The sheriff brought him water twice and a plate of something that might have been food once. Never spoke, just shoved it through the bars and left. Then, on what Nate guessed was the third day, he heard voices outside his cell. The sheriff's voice grumbling. And then, "I'm here to see my husband. You can't stop me. Josie." The sheriff appeared at the bars looking irritated. 5 minutes, that's all you get." He unlocked the cell and let Josie in, then locked it again behind her. 5 minutes, he repeated, and walked away. Josie rushed to Nate, her hands reaching for his face, checking him over like she was afraid he'd been hurt. "Are you all right? Have they fed you? Are you—" "I'm fine." He caught her hands, holding them still. "What are you doing here? It's not safe for you to be in town alone." "I don't care about safe. I care about you." She was crying again, but her voice was fierce. "I went to see a lawyer. Mr. Henderson said he'd take the case, but he needs money up front. Money we don't have." "Then don't worry about it. I'll take whatever punishment they give me and—" "No." Josie gripped his hands tighter. "No, you're not giving up. We're not giving up. I went to see Tobias. He's putting together money from people in town, people who know the Merricks are corrupt, who are tired of watching them get away with everything. Josie, Mrs. Murphy contributed, and 3 other families. It's not much, but it might be enough for Henderson to at least mount a defense." She took a shaky breath. "And I went to see Annabelle." Nate's heart stopped. "You what?" "I went to the Hartwell house. I asked to speak to her." Josie's voice dropped. "I thought maybe she could talk to Pa. Maybe she could convince him to drop this. And she wouldn't see me. Had Magnolia tell me she was indisposed." Josie's face crumpled. "Your precious Annabelle couldn't be bothered to help even when your freedom was at stake." Nate pulled Josie into his arms, feeling her shake against him. "It's all right. It's not all right. None of this is all right." She pulled back to look at him, her eyes red and swollen. "But I'm going to fix it. I'm going to find a way to get you out of here and make sure Clayton can't hurt us anymore." "How?" "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out." She touched his face gently. "Because you're worth fighting for, Nate. This life we're building, it's worth fighting for." The sheriff's heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. "Time's up." Josie kissed Nate quickly, desperately, before the sheriff could pull her away. It was their first real kiss, and it tasted like salt and fear, and something that might have been hope. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I know you don't love me back yet, but I love you, and I'm not giving up on us." Then she was gone, and Nate was alone in the cell again. But he wasn't really alone, because for the first time in his life, someone was fighting for him. Someone believed he was worth the effort. And that someone was Josie. Not Annabelle, who'd never even bothered to learn his name. Not the town that had laughed at him. Not anyone he'd tried to impress or please or prove himself to. Just Josie, who'd been there all along. The next day, Nate had an unexpected visitor. Tobias Grant stood outside the cell holding his hat in his hands, his expression serious. "Sheriff gave me 10 minutes, he said, "so I'll make this quick. What are you doing here? Your wife came to me, asked for help." Tobias glanced toward the front of the jail where the sheriff sat. "She's raising money for a lawyer, but that ain't gonna be enough. Clayton's got the judge in his pocket. Everyone knows it. Then what's the point? The point is sometimes you gotta fight even when you know you'll lose, because the fighting itself matters." Tobias moved closer to the bars. "But I didn't come here to give you a speech. I came to tell you what's happening out there while you're in here." Nate's gut clenched. "What's happening?" "Clayton's men have been seen near your property. Twice now. Your wife runs them off with your rifle, but she's alone out there, Brennan, and Clayton's getting bolder." Rage and fear warred in Nate's chest. "I have to get out of here. Judge comes tomorrow. Henderson thinks he can argue for release until trial, but it's a long shot." Tobias's voice dropped. "There's another option." "What?" "You sell Clayton what he wants, the water rights. Sign them over, and he drops the charges. You and your wife get to live in peace." "That's not peace. That's surrender." "Sometimes surrender's the smartest move, especially when you're outnumbered and outgunned." Tobias studied him. "But I'm guessing that's not what you want to hear. Would you surrender?" Tobias was quiet for a long moment. "No, I wouldn't. But I also know what it's like to have everything taken from you, and I know what it's like to fight back and lose. So I'm telling you, think real hard about what you're willing to sacrifice before you make your choice." He left without another word, and Nate sat in the darkness thinking about Josie alone at the ranch, thinking about Clayton's threats, thinking about what it meant to fight for something you loved, even when the odds were impossible. By the time the sun rose the next morning, he'd made his decision. He wasn't giving up. Not his land, not his wife, not the life they were building together, even if it cost him everything. The judge arrived at noon, a thin, severe man named Aldrich, who looked like he'd never smiled in his life. The trial, if you could call it that, was held in the saloon since Red Bluff didn't have a proper courthouse. Clayton sat in the front, looking smug and unbruised, despite his claims of assault. His father sat beside him, a mountain of a man who radiated power and menace. Josie sat on the opposite side, flanked by Tobias and Mrs. Murphy. She wore her best dress and held her head high, but Nate could see her hands shaking in her lap. Mr. Henderson stood to present Nate's defense, but Judge Aldrich cut him off before he'd said 3 sentences. "I've heard enough. The facts are simple. Mr. Merrick claims assault. Mr. Brennan admits to striking him. Case closed." "But, Your Honor," Henderson protested, "there were extenuating circumstances. Irrelevant. Violence is violence." Aldrich banged his gavel. "Nathaniel Brennan, you're fined $50 and sentenced to 30 days in jail." The courtroom erupted. Josie cried out in protest. Tobias swore loudly. Mrs. Murphy stood up shouting about injustice. But underneath all the noise, Nate heard something else. Clayton Merrick laughing. And in that moment, something inside Nate broke. Not his spirit. Something deeper. The part of him that still believed the world could be fair, that working hard and being honorable mattered, that good people got what they deserved. All of that shattered like glass. The world wasn't fair. It never had been. And the only way to survive in it was to fight dirty, just like the men who had everything fought dirty to keep it. As the sheriff dragged him back toward the jail, Nate caught Josie's eyes across the crowded room, and he saw the same realization dawning in her expression. If they wanted to win, they'd have to stop playing by rules that were designed to keep them down. They'd have to fight back. That night, Josie didn't go home. She sat on the steps outside the jail until the sun went down, until the cold seeped through her dress and made her bones ache. The sheriff had already told her twice to leave, but she hadn't moved. Couldn't move. Every time she thought about riding back to that empty cabin alone, something inside her seized up. Mrs. Murphy found her there just after dark, brought her a blanket and a tin cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm. "You can't stay here all night, child." "Why not?" Josie's voice was hollow. "He's in there because of me, because he defended me. The least I can do is be close." "This ain't your fault." Mrs. Murphy sat down beside her, joints creaking. "This is Clayton Merrick's doing. Him and that corrupt judge and your bastard of a father." Josie flinched at the word, even though she'd thought it herself 1,000 times. "My father." She laughed bitterly. "He stood there in that courtroom and watched them railroad Nate, and he didn't say a word. Didn't even look at me. Like I don't exist. Like I never existed. Some men are so eaten up by their own poison they can't see anything else." Mrs. Murphy put a weathered hand on Josie's shoulder. "But you listen to me. You got something your father never had and never will. You got a good heart. You got courage. And you got a husband in there who'd burn the world down for you if you asked him to. A husband who's going to be locked up for a month while Clayton does God knows what to our ranch. Then don't let Clayton do anything. Fight back." Josie turned to look at the older woman. "How I'm one person. I can't—" "You ain't one person. You got Tobias. You got me. You got others in this town who are sick to death of watching the Merricks take whatever they want." Mrs. Murphy's eyes glinted in the lamplight. "What you need is a plan, and what they need is someone brave enough to stand up first. Be that person, Josie." The words settled into Josie's chest like hot coals. For so long, she'd been the one who stayed quiet, who accepted her lot, who believed she deserved whatever scraps life threw her way. But Nate had changed something in her, shown her she was worth fighting for. Now it was her turn to fight. "All right," she said quietly. "All right. Help me figure out what to do." They talked long into the night, voices low, building a plan that was probably crazy and definitely dangerous. But it was a plan, and it was better than doing nothing. When Josie finally left, she didn't go home. She went to Tobias Grant's small house behind the blacksmith shop and knocked until he answered, bleary-eyed and confused. "Miss Josie, what in the it's past midnight? I need your help, and I need you to help me gather anyone else in this town who's willing to stand against Clayton Merrick." Tobias studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded, a slow smile spreading across his features. "Now that's what I've been waiting to hear." Yeah. The next morning, Josie rode out to the ranch before dawn. She fed the animals, milked the cow, collected eggs, did all the morning chores Nate usually handled. Her body ached from lack of sleep, but she couldn't rest. Not yet. She was in the barn mucking out Midnight's stall when she heard horses. Multiple horses. Her heart jumped into her throat and she grabbed the pitchfork, gripping it tight as she stepped into the yard. 4 riders. Clayton's men. Not Clayton himself, he was too smart to get his own hands dirty, but the same ranch hands who'd been with him before. The one in front, a scarred man named Pike, tipped his hat with mock politeness. "Morning, Mrs. Brennan. Lovely day." "Get off my property." "Now that ain't very hospitable. We just came to check on you. Make sure you're managing all right with your husband locked up." Pike's smile was all wrong. "Must be hard being out here all alone. A woman by herself. Anything could happen." Josie raised the pitchfork. Her arms shook, but her voice was steady. "I said get off my property." "Or what, you gonna stick us with that?" Pike laughed, and his men joined in. "Come on now, be reasonable. Mr. Merrick just wants to talk. He's got a generous offer for you. Very generous. All you gotta do is sign over them water rights, and your husband walks free. Judge already agreed to overturn the sentence. It's a good deal. My husband and I don't make deals with thieves." Pike's smile vanished. "That's a mistake." "Maybe. But it's our mistake to make. Now leave, or I start screaming, and every neighbor within 5 miles will hear me." "Ain't no neighbors within 5 miles, and you know it." Josie's heart hammered, but she kept the pitchfork level. "Then I guess you'll just have to see what I'm willing to do with this." For a tense moment, nobody moved. Pike stared at Josie, measuring her, trying to decide if she was bluffing. Josie stared back, putting every ounce of steel she had into her gaze. Finally, Pike spat in the dirt. "You got 1 week. 1 week to think real hard about your situation. After that, things are going to get unpleasant." They rode off, and Josie stood there holding the pitchfork until her arms went numb. Then she collapsed against the barn wall, shaking so hard she thought she might fly apart. But she'd done it. She'd stood her ground. Now she had to make sure she could keep standing. That afternoon, Josie rode into town for the second time that day. She went straight to the jail, demanded to see Nate, and this time, the sheriff didn't argue. Just looked at her with something that might have been grudging respect and let her through. Nate was pacing his cell like a caged animal. He rushed to the bars when he saw her. "Thank God. I heard Clayton's men rode out to the ranch. Are you hurt? Did they?" "I'm fine. I handled it." She reached through the bars and took his hands. "But they'll be back. And next time they might not just be making threats." "Then you can't stay there alone. Go to Mrs. Murphy's. Stay in town where there are people around." "No." "Josie, damn it, this isn't the time to be stubborn." "I'm not being stubborn. I'm being smart." She squeezed his hands tighter. "If I leave the ranch, Clayton wins. He'll move in claim squatters' rights, and by the time you're out of here, it'll be too late to get it back. I have to stay. I have to hold the ground." Nate's jaw worked. She could see the war in his eyes, the need to protect her fighting against the knowledge that she was right. "I hate this," he said finally, voice rough. "I hate being locked in here while you're out there in danger." "I know, but this is what we've got. So we work with it." She took a breath. "Tobias is organizing people, folks who are tired of the Merricks running roughshod over everyone. They're going to help me watch the ranch, rotate shifts, make sure I'm not alone." "That's not enough. If Clayton decides to really come after us, then we'll deal with it. Together. Even if we're apart right now, we're still together. You understand, you and me, Nate? We're a team." Her voice dropped. "And I need you to trust me. Trust that I can do this." Nate stared at her, and something in his expression shifted. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something else. Something that looked like pride. "I do trust you," he said quietly. "I trust you more than I've ever trusted anyone." Josie felt tears prick her eyes. "Then have faith. We're going to get through this." She kissed him through the bars, soft and quick, then pulled away before the sheriff could interrupt them. As she walked out of the jail, she heard Nate call after her. "Josie." She turned back. "I love you." The words hit her like a physical blow. She'd said them to him, but she'd never expected to hear them back. Not really. Not from a man who'd wanted someone else for so long. "What? I love you," Nate repeated louder this time. "I should have said it before, should have said it a dozen times. But I'm saying it now. I love you, Josie. And when I get out of here, I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving it." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You already have," she whispered. Then she left before she completely fell apart, but her heart felt like it was flying. The next 5 days were the longest of Josie's life. True to his word, Tobias organized a rotation of townspeople to help watch the ranch. He took the first night shift himself, sleeping in the barn with a loaded rifle across his lap. Mrs. Murphy came during the days helping with chores and bringing food. 3 other families' people the Merricks had wronged over the years took turns standing guard. Clayton's men came back twice more, but each time they found Josie wasn't alone, they retreated. They were bullies, not fighters. They wanted easy targets, not actual resistance. But on the 6th day, everything changed. Josie woke to the smell of smoke. She bolted out of bed, heart pounding, and ran to the window. The barn was on fire. Flames licked up the sides, turning the night sky orange. She could hear Midnight screaming inside, could hear the other animals panicking. She didn't think, just grabbed a bucket and ran. The heat hit her like a wall when she reached the barn door. Smoke poured out thick and black. She couldn't see, could barely breathe, but she knew the layout by heart. Knew exactly where Midnight's stall was. She stumbled through the smoke, found the latch, threw it open. The stallion burst past her, wild-eyed with terror, and bolted into the night. She moved to the next stall, and the next, releasing the other animals choking on smoke, her eyes streaming. She was reaching for the last stall when a beam above her cracked with a sound like a gunshot. She looked up just in time to see it falling, saw her death coming in slow motion. Then someone grabbed her and yanked her backward. The beam crashed down where she'd been standing, throwing up a shower of sparks. Tobias dragged her out of the burning barn and into the yard. She collapsed on the grass, coughing so hard she thought she'd break ribs. "You damn fool!" Tobias shouted, but his hands were gentle as he checked her over. "Could have gotten yourself killed. The animals are out, all of them, because of you." He looked back at the barn, his face grim. But the barn's gone. Nothing we can do now but let it burn. They stood together and watched Nate's barn collapse in on itself, consumed by flames that turned the night bright as day. "This was Clayton," Josie said, her voice raw from smoke. "This was him sending a message." "No doubt." Tobias handed her his canteen. "Question is, what are you going to do about it?" Josie drank the water, soothing her burned throat. She thought about Nate locked in that cell. Thought about Clayton thinking he could terrorize them into submission. Thought about every person who'd ever looked at her and seen nothing worth noticing. "I'm going to make him pay," she said. The next morning, Josie rode into town looking like she'd been through hell. Her clothes were singed, her face was smudged with soot, and her eyes were red from smoke and tears. But her spine was steel straight as she marched into the sheriff's office. Her father looked up from his desk, his expression flickering with surprise before settling back into indifference. "What do you want?" "Someone burned our barn last night, burned it to the ground. Could have killed me, could have killed the animals." The sheriff leaned back in his chair. "That's so. You see who did it. Clayton Merrick's men. You got proof. I know it was them. Everyone knows it was them. Knowing and proving are 2 different things." He picked up a pen, started writing in his ledger like she wasn't even there. "If you want to file a complaint, I'll look into it. But without witnesses or evidence, there ain't much I can do." "You won't do anything because Clayton's father pays you to look the other way." The pen stopped moving. The sheriff's eyes went cold and hard. "Careful, girl. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth, and everyone in this town knows it. They're just too scared to say it out loud." Josie stepped closer to his desk. "But I'm not scared anymore. I'm done being scared. I'm done letting you and men like you decide what I'm worth." "You done with your speech?" The sheriff stood towering over her. "Because if you are, I got work to do. Real work. Not listening to a hysterical woman make wild accusations she can't back up." "I'm not hysterical. I'm furious. There's a difference. Get out of my office." "No." Something dangerous flashed in the sheriff's eyes. "What did you say?" "I said no. I'm not leaving until you do your job. Until you admit that Clayton Merrick is terrorizing innocent people, and you're letting him do it because it's convenient for you." The sheriff's hand moved to the gun at his hip. "I said get out." "You going to shoot me, Pa?" Josie's voice broke on the word. Your own daughter? Is that what it's come to? For one terrible moment, she thought he might actually do it. Then Mrs. Murphy burst through the door, Tobias right behind her, and the moment shattered. "What in the hell is going on here?" Mrs. Murphy demanded. "I heard shouting clear down the street." "Nothing that concerns you, Eleanor." "It concerns me if you're threatening this girl." Mrs. Murphy moved to stand beside Josie. "And I reckon it concerns half the town, seeing as how we all saw the fire last night. Saw how close Miss Josie came to dying." "That's not—" "We also know Clayton's been making threats." Tobias added, his deep voice filling the small office. "And we know you've done nothing about it. So here's what's going to happen, Sheriff. You're going to investigate that fire properly. And you're going to make sure Clayton Merrick knows he can't just burn people out without consequences." The sheriff looked between them, his face flushing red with anger, and something that might have been shame. "You people don't tell me how to do my job." "Then do your job," Josie said quietly. "For once in your life, do the right thing." Their eyes met, and for just a second, Josie saw something in her father's face. Pain. Regret. A lifetime of bad choices staring back at him. Then his expression hardened again, and the moment was gone. "I'll look into it. That's all I can promise." It wasn't enough, but it was something. Josie left the office with Mrs. Murphy and Tobias flanking her like honor guards. She was shaking so hard she could barely walk, but she'd done it. She'd stood up to her father. Stood up to the man who'd spent her entire life making her feel small and worthless, and she'd survived. That evening, Josie went to see Nate. She told him everything. The fire, the confrontation with her father, the way the town was slowly starting to rally around them. He listened with his hands gripping the bars so tight, his knuckles went white. "You could have died," he said when she finished. "You ran into a burning barn, Josie. You could have—" "But I didn't. I'm here. I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're covered in burns and bruises and God knows what else." He reached through the bars, touching her face gently. "You're the bravest person I've ever met. You know that. I'm not brave. I'm terrified. Being brave means being terrified and doing it anyway." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "I'm so damn proud of you. And so damn scared for you. And I don't know which feeling is stronger." "5 more days," Josie said. 5 more days and you're out of here. We just have to hold on until then. And if Clayton makes another move before then I'll handle it, like I've been handling everything else." She managed to smile. "I'm not the same girl you married, Nate. I'm not invisible anymore. I won't let myself be." "You were never invisible to me. I was just too blind to see you properly." He leaned his forehead against the bars. "When I get out of here, things are going to change. I'm going to rebuild that barn. I'm going to make sure you never have to face danger alone again. And I'm going to love you the way you deserve to be loved, like you're the most important person in the world." "You already do that." "Not enough. Never enough." His voice dropped to a whisper. "You saved me, Josie. From loneliness. From becoming bitter and small. From wasting my life chasing things that don't matter. You saved me." Tears blurred Josie's vision. "We saved each other." They stayed like that until the sheriff came to kick her out, just holding each other through the bars, drawing strength from each other's presence. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to the ranch. Josie was hauling water from the well when she heard a carriage approaching. She dropped the bucket and reached for the rifle Tobias had insisted she keep close, then froze when she saw who was driving. Annabelle Hartwell, in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than Josie made in a year, sitting in a fancy carriage like she was visiting royalty. Josie's hands tightened on the rifle. "You're not welcome here." Annabelle climbed down gracefully, carefully avoiding the mud. "I need to talk to you. I've got nothing to say to you. Please." The words sounded strange coming from Annabelle's mouth. "Just 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Against her better judgment, Josie nodded. She didn't lower the rifle, though. Annabelle walked closer, and for the first time, Josie really looked at her sister. Saw the dark circles under her eyes that even powder couldn't quite hide. Saw the way her hands twisted together nervously. Saw something that looked almost like guilt. "I heard about the fire," Annabelle said. "I heard you almost died." "Is that what you came here to say? To tell me you heard?" "No, I came to—" Annabelle took a breath. "I came to apologize." Josie nearly dropped the rifle. "What?" "I should have helped when you came asking. When your husband was arrested. I should have talked to Pa. Should have done something." Annabelle looked down at her hands. "But I didn't. I was a coward. I've always been a coward." "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I watched you ride into town this morning looking like you'd been through hell, and you still had your head held high. Still had the courage to face Pa." Annabelle's voice cracked. "And I realized I've never had that kind of courage. Never stood up for anything or anyone, including myself." Josie stared at her sister, trying to find the trap. The cruelty. But all she saw was the woman who looked tired and sad and maybe, just maybe, genuine. "Pa's engaged me to Henry Whitmore," Annabelle continued. "The banker's son from Denver. I met him once. He's 43, boring as dirt, and only wants me because I'm pretty." She laughed bitterly. "And I'm going to marry him because I'm too scared to say no, too scared to disappoint Pa, too scared to be alone." "Then say no." "It's not that simple." "Yes, it is." Josie set the rifle down. "I spent my whole life thinking I couldn't say no. Thinking I had to accept whatever scraps I was given because I wasn't worth more. But I was wrong. And so are you." Annabelle wiped her eyes. "You're stronger than me." "No. I just finally found something worth being strong for." Josie stepped closer. "Why did you really come here?" "To warn you. Clayton's planning something. I overheard him talking to Pa last night. He's not going to wait for your husband to get out of jail. He's going to make another move, soon." Josie's blood ran cold. "What kind of move?" "I don't know exactly, but he was talking about making an example, about showing the whole territory what happens when people refuse his generosity." Annabelle gripped Josie's arm. "You need to be careful. You need to protect yourself." "Why do you care? You've never cared before." "Because you're my sister. And because—" Annabelle's voice dropped to a whisper. "Because watching you be brave is making me realize how cowardly I've been. And I don't want to live like that anymore." She turned and climbed back into her carriage before Josie could respond, then looked back one more time. "For what it's worth, I think that cowboy of yours is lucky. He ended up with the right sister after all." Then she was gone, leaving Josie standing in the yard with her heart pounding and her mind racing. Clayton was planning something. Something big. And she had 3 days to figure out how to stop him. Chapter 10. Josie didn't waste time. She gathered everyone who'd been helping her. Tobias, Mrs. Murphy, the Henderson family, the Grants, even old Mr. Peterson, who'd lost land to the Merricks 5 years back. They met in the barn ruins that night, using the blackened timbers as cover, and she told them everything Annabelle had said. "We can't just wait for him to attack," Tobias said. "We need to strike first." "Strike how?" Mrs. Murphy demanded. "We're not killers." "No, but we can be smart. We can turn Clayton's tactics against him." Tobias looked at Josie. "He wants to make an example of you. Let's make an example of him. Show this territory that the Merricks don't own everything." They talked late into the night, building a plan that was risky and maybe impossible, but it was the only option they had. 2 days later, when Nate had only 48 hours left in jail, Clayton made his move. He came himself this time with 10 men. Not to threaten or intimidate, to take the land by force. But Josie was ready. She stood in the yard with Tobias on one side and Mrs. Murphy on the other. Behind them stood 20 people from Red Bluff farmers, shopkeepers, the doctor, the schoolteacher, people who'd finally had enough. All of them armed. All of them ready to fight. Clayton reined in his horse, his smile faltering when he saw the crowd. "Well now," he said, trying to sound amused. "Looks like you made some friends." "Looks like you made some enemies," Josie called back. "This land is ours. We're not giving it up. Not to you. Not to anyone. You don't have a choice." "Yes, we do, and we're choosing to stand our ground." For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. 20 townspeople faced 10 hired guns, and everyone knew if someone fired the first shot, people would die. Then from behind Clayton's men came the sound of more horses. Sheriff Hartwell rode into view, and for once in his life, he was doing something right. "That's enough, Clayton," the sheriff called out. "I got witnesses who saw your men start that fire, got testimony about your threats. You're under arrest." Clayton's face went purple with rage. "You can't arrest me. My father—" "Your father doesn't run this town, not anymore." The sheriff looked at Josie, and something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not love, but maybe the beginning of respect. "Now come along peaceful, or I'll drag you in front of all these good people." Clayton's men looked at each other uncertain. Without their leader, they were just hired hands who didn't want trouble. One by one, they lowered their weapons. And just like that, it was over. Josie's legs almost gave out with relief, but she stayed standing. Stayed strong. Because this was her moment, her victory. She'd fought back, and she'd won. 2 days later, when Nate walked out of that jail cell, a free man, the first thing he saw was Josie waiting for him in the street. She looked different, stood different, like she'd grown 3 inches taller in the month he'd been locked up. He ran to her and picked her up, spinning her around while she laughed and cried at the same time. "You did it," he said, holding her close. "You saved everything." "We did it," she corrected. "All of us together." He kissed her then deep and long and full of all the love and fear and relief he'd been holding back. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying. "Take me home," Josie whispered. "Where's home?" She smiled. "Wherever we're together." And as they rode out of Red Bluff side by side, Nate realized something. He'd spent so long chasing what he thought he wanted. Acceptance status, a beautiful wife who'd make him somebody. But he'd ended up with something better. A partner. An equal. Someone who'd fight beside him instead of standing behind him looking pretty. He'd ended up with Josie, and he'd never been luckier in his life. The ride home felt different. The same dusty road, the same mountains in the distance, but everything had changed. Nate rode beside Josie instead of ahead of her, and when their eyes met, there was no more distance between them. No more walls. Just 2 people who'd walked through fire and come out stronger. They reached the ranch as the sun was setting, painting everything gold and orange. The burned ruins of the barn stood like a skeleton against the sky, but somehow it didn't look like defeat anymore. It looked like survival. Nate dismounted and helped Josie down, his hands lingering on her waist longer than necessary. She didn't pull away. "We'll rebuild," he said, looking at the destruction. "Better than before. Stronger. I know we will." Josie touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "But first I need you to know something." "What?" "I'm not the same person you married. That girl who stood on that platform and cried while everyone laughed, she's gone. I buried her in those barn ashes." Nate caught her hand, pressed it against his cheek. "Good. She deserved better than the life she had. Better than the way I treated her at first. You were honest. That's more than most people gave me. I was a fool. I looked right at you and didn't see you. Took me almost losing you to wake up." He pulled her closer. "But I see you now, Josie. I see exactly who you are. And I'm asking if you'll have me. Not because of some deal or some obligation, but because I love you, and I want to spend every day for the rest of my life proving it." Josie's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I already have you, you idiot. Had you since that first night in the barn when you actually listened to me about the horse, when you treated me like I knew something worth knowing." "Then let me say it right." Nate dropped to one knee in the dirt, still holding her hand. "Josephine Hartwell Brennan, will you marry me again? Properly this time, with people who love us watching and vows that mean something." She laughed through her tears. "We're already married." "I know, but I want to do it right. Want to stand in front of God and everyone and choose you. Not because I have to, because I want to, because you're the only woman I'll ever want." Josie pulled him to his feet and kissed him hard enough to make them both dizzy. "Yes," she whispered against his mouth. "Yes, I'll marry you again, as many times as you want." That night, they made love for the first time as a real married couple. Not out of duty or desperation, but out of love and choice, and the deep certainty that they belonged to each other. And when Josie fell asleep in Nate's arms, she didn't feel like a burden anymore. She felt like exactly what she was, his partner, his equal, his home. The next morning, they started rebuilding. Tobias came at dawn with lumber he'd been saving for his own projects. Mrs. Murphy brought food and gossip about how Clayton was sitting in the jail cell Nate had just vacated, facing charges for arson and attempted murder. The Henderson family showed up with their teenage sons ready to work. Even Mr. Peterson came old and bent, but determined to help. They worked through the day, sweat and sawdust, the sound of hammers, and the smell of fresh-cut wood. Josie worked right alongside the men, and nobody questioned it. Nobody made jokes. They'd all seen what she could do. They knew better now. By sunset, the frame of the new barn was up. It wasn't finished, but it was started. And that was enough. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars come out, Nate pulled Josie close and said something he'd been thinking about all day. "I want to do more than just survive here. I want to build something that matters." "What do you mean?" "I mean." He gestured toward the new barn. "All these people who helped us, they're good people, but some of them are struggling. Some of them got pushed down by folks like the Merricks and never got back up. I want to help them, want to use what we have to give other people a chance." Josie turned to look at him. "You want to take in strays?" "I want to build a place where people who've been told they're worthless can learn they're not, where kids who got nobody can have somebody, where—" He broke off, searching for the right words. "Where people like us can find a home." Josie's heart swelled so big she thought it might crack her ribs. "That's a beautiful dream." "It's not just a dream. We can do it. We've got the land, got the skills, and now we've got people who believe in us." He took her hand. "What do you think?" "I think you're the best man I've ever known, and I think we should start tomorrow." They sealed the promise with a kiss, and neither of them noticed Mrs. Murphy watching from the yard, smiling like she'd just witnessed something holy. 3 weeks later, their first lost soul arrived. A boy of about 10, half-starved and covered in bruises, stumbled onto the property just after dawn. His name was Samuel, and he didn't talk much at first, just watched everything with wary eyes, like he expected the world to hit him again. Josie fed him without asking questions. Nate gave him a place in the barn and didn't push him to explain where he came from. They just let him be. Let him see that not all people were cruel, not all homes were dangerous. Slowly, Samuel started to open up, started helping with chores without being asked, started smiling when midnight nuzzled his hand looking for treats, started calling them Mr. Nate and Miss Josie like they were family. One night, sitting by the fire, Samuel finally told them his story. Parents dead from fever. Taken in by an uncle who worked him like a slave and beat him when he was too slow. He'd run away 3 weeks ago and been living rough, stealing food where he could, sleeping in barns. "I'll leave if you want," Samuel said, staring at his hands. "I know I'm trouble. Everybody says so." Josie knelt in front of him, lifted his chin so he had to look at her. You listen to me. You're not trouble. You're a child who deserved better than what you got. And if you want to stay here, you can stay as long as you need. We'll teach you everything we know. And nobody is ever going to hurt you again." Samuel's eyes filled with tears. "You mean it?" "Every word," Nate said from the doorway. "You're family now, son, if you'll have us." Samuel threw himself at Josie, sobbing like his heart was breaking. But Josie understood these weren't sad tears. These were the tears of a child who'd finally found a safe place to fall apart. She held him and rocked him and whispered all the things she'd needed someone to tell her when she was young. "You're worthy. You're loved. You matter." And watching them, Nate felt something settle in his chest. This was what he'd been missing all those years, chasing after Annabelle and approval and all those empty things. This right here, this messy, imperfect family they were building, this was what mattered. By spring, word had spread. The Brennan Ranch became known as a place where the broken could heal. They took in a teenage girl who'd been cast out by her family for getting pregnant. Took in an elderly man whose children had abandoned him. Took in a young couple who'd lost everything in a fire and had nowhere else to go. The ranch grew. They built more structures, planted more crops, trained more horses. Everyone worked according to their ability and ate according to their need. It wasn't charity. It was community. It was family. Josie bloomed in ways that took Nate's breath away. She became the heart of their growing family, the one everyone turned to when they were hurting or scared. She had a gift for seeing people, really seeing them the way someone had finally seen her, and she used that gift to help others find their way home. One afternoon in early June, Nate found her sitting in the garden with 3 children gathered around her. She was teaching them to read, using a battered book she'd probably read 100 times herself. Her face was flushed from the heat, her dress was stained with dirt, and she'd never looked more beautiful. She glanced up and caught him staring. "What? Just thinking about how lucky I am." "Lucky?" She laughed. "We're running an orphanage on a shoestring budget. Half our residents can't pay their way. We're working ourselves to death every single day. That's not luck, Nate. That's insanity." "Maybe, but it's our insanity." He walked over and kissed the top of her head. "And I wouldn't trade it for anything." One of the children, a little girl named Emma, tugged on Josie's sleeve. "Miss Josie, are you and Mr. Nate in love?" Josie glanced at Nate, her eyes soft. "Yes, sweetheart. We are." "Did you love each other right away, like in the fairy tales?" "No," Josie said honestly. "It took time, and work, and choosing each other every single day, even when it was hard." "That don't sound like a fairy tale." "That's because real love isn't a fairy tale. It's better." Josie pulled the little girl onto her lap. "Fairy tales end when the prince and princess get married. Real love is what happens after that. When you wake up and choose to love someone even when they're grumpy or sick or making mistakes, that's the real magic." Emma thought about this seriously. "I want that kind of love someday." "You'll find it," Josie promised. "And when you do, you'll know, because it'll feel like coming home." That summer, Red Bluff held another bride fair. Nate and Josie rode into town together, curious to see if anything had changed. What they found surprised them both. Sheriff Hartwell was no longer sheriff. He'd stepped down after Clayton's trial, citing health reasons, though everyone knew the real reason was shame. He'd been complicit in too much corruption for too long, and the town had finally had enough. A new sheriff had been elected, Tobias Grant, who wore the badge with quiet dignity and actually enforced the law fairly. Clayton was gone, sent to prison in Denver for 20 years. His father's ranch had been seized to pay restitution to the people they'd wronged, and the land had been divided up among small farmers who'd never dreamed of owning property. And Annabelle stood on the platform, but not as a bride for sale. She stood there in a simple dress, helping organize a new system where women could choose their own husbands instead of being auctioned off like cattle. She caught Josie's eye across the square and smiled. A real smile, not the practiced one she used to wear. After the fair, Annabelle approached them. She looked different too, less polished but more real. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for showing me what courage looks like." "You found your own courage," Josie replied. "I just reminded you it was there. I broke my engagement. Pa nearly had apoplexy, but I did it anyway." Annabelle laughed, and it sounded free. "I'm working with the church now, helping women who need to leave bad situations. It's not glamorous, but it matters." "That's good, Annabelle. Really good." They stood there for a moment, two sisters who'd never really known each other finally seeing each other clearly. "I'm sorry," Annabelle said quietly, "for all the years I stood by and watched them treat you like you didn't matter, for being too weak to speak up." "I forgive you," Josie said, and she meant it. Holding on to anger would only poison the good life she was building. "But don't waste time on regret. Use it. Help other women the way you wished someone had helped me." Annabelle nodded, tears in her eyes. Then she did something she'd never done before. She hugged her sister. Really hugged her like she meant it. When they pulled apart, both women were crying. But they were smiling too. 2 years passed. The ranch prospered. They trained horses that sold across 3 territories. They grew crops that fed not just their extended family, but several families in town. They became known as the place where broken things were mended. Samuel grew strong and tall, learned to train horses better than anyone except Josie. The pregnant girl had her baby, a daughter she named Hope, and eventually married a kind young man who loved them both. The elderly man passed away peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by people who'd made his last years worth living. And through it all, Nate and Josie worked side by side, loved fiercely, argued occasionally, and chose each other every single day. One evening in late autumn, almost exactly 3 years after that terrible day in the town square, Josie stood on the porch watching the sunset. Nate came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about? About how different everything is now. How different I am." "You're not different. You're just finally who you were always meant to be." Josie turned in his arms to face him. "Do you ever think about that day? About what would have happened if the sheriff had actually given you Annabelle?" "Sometimes," Nate admitted, "but not the way you think." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I think about it and I'm grateful he didn't. Grateful he gave me you instead." He cupped her face in his hands. "Annabelle would have been a fine wife, I'm sure. Pretty and proper and everything I thought I wanted. But she wouldn't have been you. Wouldn't have worked beside me. Wouldn't have fought for this place like it was worth dying for. Wouldn't have seen the lost kids and the broken people and said, 'They're ours now.'" His voice got rough with emotion. "She wouldn't have saved me, Josie. Not like you did. Not by making me better. Not by challenging me to be more than I thought I could be." Josie's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't save you. We saved each other." "Then let's keep saving each other. Every day. For the rest of our lives." He kissed her as the sun dropped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. Behind them, through the open door, they could hear Samuel teaching the younger children a song. Could smell dinner cooking. Could hear laughter and life and all the messy, beautiful chaos of the family they'd built. This was home. Not the cabin or the land or the horses. This right here. This love they'd fought for, this family they'd chosen. This life they'd built from ashes and determination, and refusing to accept what the world said they deserved. This was everything. 5 years after the wedding that changed everything, Red Bluff held a celebration. The town had voted to officially recognize the Brennan Ranch as a charitable organization, protecting it from taxation and ensuring it could continue its work, helping the displaced and forgotten. Nate stood on the same platform where he'd once tamed a wild horse and been publicly humiliated. But this time, The crowd wasn't laughing. They were cheering. Josie stood beside him, not behind him, his partner in every way that mattered. She was pregnant 6 months along with their first biological child, though they already had a dozen kids who called them Ma and Pa. She glowed with health and happiness, and when Nate looked at her, he still couldn't believe his luck. Sheriff Grant presented them with an official proclamation. Mrs. Murphy cried openly. Even old Mr. Peterson stood up to applaud, his weathered face creased with pride. When it was Nate's turn to speak, he kept it simple. 5 years ago, I came to this town thinking I knew what I wanted, thinking I knew what would make me happy. I was wrong about everything except one thing. I knew I wanted a family, a place to belong. He looked at Josie. What I didn't know was that family isn't about blood. It's about choice. It's about showing up every day for the people who matter. It's about building something bigger than yourself. He gestured toward the ranch in the distance. That place isn't just ours. It belongs to everyone who's found refuge there. Everyone who's learned that being broken doesn't mean being worthless. Everyone who's discovered that the labels people put on you don't define who you are. His voice got stronger. They called my wife fat and worthless. They called me a fool and an outsider. They tried to break us, but we didn't break. We bent, sure. We struggled, but we came through it stronger. And now we're using that strength to help others do the same. The crowd roared approval. Josie stepped forward, and the crowd quieted instantly. She rarely spoke in public, but when she did, people listened. I want to say something to everyone watching who's ever been told they're not enough. Not pretty enough, not smart enough, not worthy enough. I was that person. I believed every cruel word, every dismissive look, every moment of being invisible. Her voice rang clear and strong across the square. But I learned something important. The people who make you feel small do it because they're small inside. They tear you down because building themselves up is too hard. And you don't have to accept their version of who you are. She looked directly at several young women in the crowd, girls who reminded her of herself at that age. You get to decide your worth. You get to choose who you become. And if someone doesn't see your value, that's their failure, not yours. Tears streamed down more than one face in that crowd. My husband and I were not special. We're just two people who refused to stay broken, who chose love over bitterness, who built something good out of something painful. She took Nate's hand. And if we can do it, anyone can. You just have to be brave enough to try. The applause was deafening. After the ceremony, people lined up to thank them, to share their own stories of overcoming hardship, to ask advice. Nate and Josie talked to each person like they mattered, because they did. Every single one. As the sun set and people started heading home, Josie found herself face to face with her father, Sheriff Hartwell. No, just. Thaddeus Hartwell now looked older than his years. Gray-haired and bent, diminished by the loss of his badge and his power. They stared at each other for a long moment. You did good, he said finally. His voice was rough, like the words cost him. Better than I ever thought you would. That's because you never really looked at me. I know. He glanced away. Your mother, you look like her. More, every year. It was hard to look at you and not see. He broke off. That's not an excuse. There is no excuse. I failed you. Failed to be the father you deserved. Josie felt the old anger rise, but underneath it was something new. Not forgiveness exactly, but maybe the beginning of letting go. You did, she agreed. But I don't need your approval anymore, Pa. I don't need you to see me. I see myself. And that's enough. Thaddeus nodded slowly. You're stronger than I ever was. Braver, too. He turned to leave, then stopped. I'm proud of you, Josephine. I know I got no right to say it. But I am. He walked away before she could respond, disappearing into the crowd. Nate appeared at her elbow. You all right? Yeah. Josie leaned against him. I'm good. That chapter's closed now. Time to focus on the next one. And what's the next chapter? She placed his hand on her swollen belly, where their baby kicked against his palm. This. Our family. Our life. All the broken souls we're going to help put back together. She smiled up at him. Everything that matters. Nate kissed her forehead. Everything that matters. He agreed. Beyond that. 10 years later, on a warm summer evening, Nate and Josie sat on their porch, watching their children play in the yard. Some were theirs by blood 3 daughters, and a son who had Josie's eyes and Nate's stubborn chin. Others were theirs by choice, the lost kids they'd taken in over the years who'd grown into young men and women, ready to take on the world. Samuel was 19 now, about to head east to train horses for a prestigious stable. Emma, the little girl who'd asked about love, was 15 and already showing Josie's gift for seeing people's pain and helping them heal. There were a dozen others, all thriving, all proof that love could overcome the worst beginnings. The ranch had grown into something beyond anything they'd imagined. Multiple buildings, thriving crops, a training program that drew students from across the territory. They'd become a model for other communities, showing what was possible when people chose compassion over cruelty. "We did it," Josie said softly. "We really did it." "We're still doing it," Nate corrected. "This isn't finished. It's ongoing. Every kid we help, every life we change, it's all part of the same story. The story that started with you on that platform accepting a bride you didn't want." Nate turned to look at her, his eyes full of everything they'd been through together. "The story that started with me being too blind to see what was right in front of me. The story where I got luckier than I deserved." "We both got lucky." "No, Josie, I got lucky. You got the man who should have chosen you from the start but was too stupid to see what he had." She laughed and swatted his arm. "You weren't stupid, just human. We all start out blind to what matters. The trick is learning to see before it's too late." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in colors that never got old, listening to their children's laughter echo across the land they'd fought so hard to keep. "Do you ever wonder what those people think now?" Josie asked. "The ones who laughed when Pa pushed me forward. The ones who said we wouldn't last a year. Probably they don't think about us at all, and that's fine. We didn't do this for them, we did it for us, for these kids, for everyone who needed proof that you can come from nothing and build something beautiful." "You're a wise man, Nathaniel Brennan." "Nah, I just married a wise woman and learned to listen." As the stars began to appear, their oldest daughter called them in for dinner. They stood together, Nate's arm around Josie's waist, both of them taking one last look at the life they'd built. It hadn't been easy. There'd been hard years, crop failures, illnesses, moments where they'd nearly lost everything. But they'd faced it all together, and they'd survived. More than survived. They'd thrived. They walked inside where their family waited, where the table was set, and the food was hot, and everyone was talking over each other in the beautiful chaos of a full house. This was what mattered, not beauty or status or approval from people who didn't matter. This, love, family, purpose. The bone-deep knowledge that you're exactly where you're supposed to be, with exactly the people you're meant to be with. Nate pulled Josie close one more time before they sat down. "I love you. Today and every day. For the rest of our lives. I love you too. Even though you're terrible at keeping your boots by the door and you snore like a freight train." He laughed full and genuine. "Even though you burn the biscuits every Sunday and steal all the blankets. Especially because of that." They joined their family at the table holding hands while Samuel said Grace and Josie thought about that terrified girl who'd stood on a platform 3 years ago certain her life was over. That girl had been wrong. Her life hadn't ended that day. It had begun. Because sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing in disguise. Sometimes the person you think you want isn't the person you need. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to find everything you never knew you needed. And sometimes, just sometimes, the greatest love story isn't the one that starts with fireworks and passion. It's the one that starts with rejection and humiliation and slowly, painfully, beautifully transforms into something real and lasting and worth every single moment of struggle it took to get there. They'd been broken and cast aside, mocked and dismissed, but they'd refused to stay down. They'd fought back, found each other, and built a life that mattered. And that right there was victory enough for anyone.